Today, we're going to spend 20 minutes or so looking at the Unifi Data as a Service platform, and specifically how customers are able to leverage that platform to help them solve their GDPR requirements. Before we jump into the actual demonstration, I'd like to spend a little bit of time to go over the context and set the overall scenario in play. We will be looking at a company called Contoso International. Contoso is a leading global retailer operating in the high-end electronics business, selling things such as computers, audio equipment, TV and video equipment, and cameras. Contoso operates across 4 primary channels, including catalog, online, brick-and-mortar retail stores, and they also sell through a reseller channel. They've been operating under this model in the United States primarily for the last 25 years or so. And within the last 90 days, they have acquired an international partner that's now given them a global presence across all of these same channels. During the demonstration this afternoon, I will be playing a couple of different roles. And I'll make it fairly obvious. I'll try to emphasize as I shift between those roles as we lay out the business scenario, which is going to follow somewhat of a day in the life type of a situation. The first role is Andy Analyst. Andy is a business analyst for Contoso, and in his role, he provides business and analysis insights to various constituents across the company. Andy maintains KPI dashboards for the executive and senior leadership teams, and he also responds to ad hoc analytics requests time to time from various departments. Stu Stewart is the second role that we'll be playing, and Stu is a data steward for Contoso, and in that role, Stu provides an overall corporate governance to the data. Stu handles data requests for access from certain groups. Stu works to determine, based on policies, what level of access and rights should be granted, should they be restricted or unrestricted, and also works as needed to rescind data access. Stu also manages the metadata catalog and the associated business glossary, as well as the policy engine that helps him determine whether or not data should be distributed across the organization. And in that role, Stu also has access to source data and provides data masking per GDPR and other compliance policies as required. So again, that's just a quick little setup for our demonstration here. And we're going to start the demonstration in the role of Andy Analyst. So I'm going to put that hat on right now. And again, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Andy Analyst. And what we're looking at on the screen right now is a very typical dashboard that I'm responsible for maintaining and creating within Contoso. A number of business metrics down the side, from sales to discounts, quantities, gross profit percentages. I can see I've got a nice sales and quantity trend report down the left-hand side. The map and the flag, though, also indicate that this is really just focused on the United States geography. Up on the top right, we see some sales and gross profit percentage, so very detailed information about our various categories and subcategories of products. So not unlike most dashboards around a sales analysis scenario that you might expect to see. However, it's very different in one respect, and that is when I look at my sales by channel, we're actually using Unifi to pull all of these disparate data sources together. And what I mean by that is if I look at stores data, that's coming from many, many POS systems that get consolidated across the organization into a Teradata instance. The catalog records come from a SQL Server database. Our online business is run through Oracle's eBusiness Suite, and as a result, all of that information is sourced into our analytics from Oracle. And from a reseller perspective, we've got a number of resellers across the United States, and recently we've picked some up around the world. Those actually get consolidated into a MySQL database. And finally, we've got in the middle here some sales promotion data. And so internally, we use a JDA promotion system that allows us to capture and start to track a lot of this information and get some analytics across our various promotions that we run. So again, big difference with what we're looking at here is that we've got 5 distinct data sources that are very easily pulled together and driven by this unified data as a service platform. So relatively recently, we have closed on an acquisition of an international company, and I've gotten a call from the senior leadership team asking me to prepare really a global dashboard so that we can start to get a much more holistic view of the business. And right off the bat, I'm not exactly sure where that data is going to come from, but I know that the other tool that I use primarily in my business day to day is Unified Data as a Service platform. So what I'm going to do is log in and do some initial investigation and find out if there are some data sources that I can now start to incorporate to satisfy this international or global view of the business. The first thing I'll do is log into Unifi. And you'll notice the simplicity of the landing page. Very, very similar to what my first experience was when I used Google search. Very simplistic, single search box. Very similar in that, though, this provides me access as an analyst to all of the data assets across the entire organization. So what I'm going to do is just initiate an English language search. I'm just going to type in, really just need a single word here, international, and see what data sets might be out there to help me with my analytics. I do see that there are 2 data sets, international customers and international sales. Both of these are grayed out though, and you can see that the lock on the left-hand side indicates that while I can see these data assets or these data sources, I currently don't have access to them. The other information, I do see some descriptions. I see that these are created by Stu. I see the created date and the last updated date. Interesting, I see this one has a tag. So a lot of our data assets are tagged for various reasons, and that helps with various search and security parameters. This one happens to be tagged as PII. But initially, I don't really see a lot of information that's going to help me figure these out. So as I hover over, though, I can see that Stu has gone to the extra mile of providing a really nice descriptive information for me. And when I look at the international sales, I can see very easily that it's made up of UK, Europe, and APAC sales by country, by customer, by month, by product SKU. It includes sales quantities and discounts. Total item cost information is also there. And typical use case for this type of information is for customer or geographic sales and profitability analysis. So this looks like it's exactly what I might need to start putting my dashboard together from a global perspective. Again, one of the great things about Unifi is I don't have to switch over to an email or pick up a phone and call anybody. Right from within the application, I can make a request for that data. And when I click that, that is going to initiate a response or a request to the data steward that owns access to this data set. And that happens to be Stu in this case. So what we'll do right now is jump out of here. And we're going to quickly switch roles. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be playing a couple different roles. We're now going to switch hats here. I'm going to pick up this scenario as if I am, in this case, Stu. And as typical, Stu is working, doing his daily business. Stu gets an alert. He's in his email account. I can see very quickly that that alert has come from Unifi, and Andy is requesting some data. So I'm going to drill into that real quick, and I get a nice message here. Dear Stu, Andy has requested some access to the following data set, international sales. A little bit of direction here about logging in, reviewing that request, providing appropriate level of access based on the Contoso governance and GDPR policies. So with that, I'm going to go ahead. I've got a nice little link. I can just launch right into the Unifi application directly from here. I'll log in. And again, I'm presented with just a super nice, super clean, simplistic view, looking for information for me about how Unifi can help me find the information I might need. I'll go ahead and type in international. And I see a couple of the data sets that are out here. And Andy has requested access to the international sales data sets. I'm the one that actually pulled all this together, and I know that he's probably going to also want the international customer data set. One thing I noticed, though, is that that has a PII tag. So I need to do a little bit of investigation before I open up that data set to the business analyst community, and I can do that, again, right from Unifi. So what I've done is I've opened up what we call, or what Unifi calls, the profiling area within this application. And this is going to give me some initial cuts and a view of the data. I can see very quickly the various columns that are in that data set. I can see easily what data types have been assigned to each of the data columns, as well as the actual values within those columns. And I can very quickly see I've got Social Security number, or in the UK, the national insurance number, phone numbers, credit cards. So quite a bit of information here that I am a little bit concerned about before I just push this data set out. Now, I also do see some nice business level information, things like the customer account balance, the customer lead source, the customer tier that ties back to our loyalty programs. So I still think that this may be something that Andy would gain value from. But what I really want to do, again, I can start to profile this data and investigate it further if I need to. If I want to get a little bit more detailed profiling around top values, some of the statistics, get a visualization around some of the breakout of each of the columns, all of that is just a click away for me as I begin to investigate this. But what I'm really interested in is the policy engine and the associated rules around this data set. And so I've drilled right into there. I can see my various columns for this international customers data set. I can see very quickly a business description or any descriptive information that we might want to capture. In our case, Contoso likes to put a business-friendly description for all of the names. So for things like key fields or anything that might be named cryptic, it's very easy for the business user to understand what that data is. I've also got a PII reference column here. So for example, I can see very quickly that some of my columns, like the address, if I scroll down here, the name, the phone number, Social Security, or national insurance number, all of those things are labeled as PII. Additionally, I do see from a data steward perspective, I can see that I am the data steward on all of the various columns. And then I also get, from a policy engine perspective, what is the data steward access level and business analyst access level to this data? And again, as a data steward, I've got full access, but this is the main thing that I'm interested in here. So from a business analyst perspective, I do see that we've got full access to a number of columns, but I also see some restricted access. So all of those PII columns, things like the address, credit card numbers, national insurance numbers, things like that, those are labeled as restricted. Data must be masked prior to sharing with the business analyst community. So what I need to do is walk through a process to actually mask that data before I can distribute that to Andy or any of the other business analysts to start working with from an analytic perspective. And the great thing about Unifi, I can initiate that process directly from here. I'm going to go in and we'll say create a little process here for masked international customers. Per GDPR and compliance policies. And then Unifi is going to walk me through a very simplistic 6-step process. And in fact, to get what I need done in this particular instance, I really don't even need all 6 steps. Again, wizard-driven, very easy to do this. And you'll see just within a couple of clicks, I'm going to jump over to the enriched data. So Unifi has detected that I do have PII data and data that must be masked within this data set. And the AI and machine learning that's running underneath within Unifi has presented me with a number of different functions. So again, you'll see with ease, I can single click. We call these, or Unifi calls these one-click functions. What that means is just with a single click, I can start to apply each of these functions to the data set in question. So if we look down the right-hand side, we can see that we've got a function to encrypt the social security number or national insurance number, mask the phone number, mask the last name, mask the credit card number, et cetera, et cetera. Again, no coding, no scripting. I don't have to go in and write any sort of a process or anything like that. As the name implies, each of these can be applied to my data set with a single click. The next step in the process is to choose the columns that I want to display and actually share with Andy or any of the other business analysts. In this case, what I'm going to go ahead and do is remove the PII columns that we have actually created masking for. From a filtering perspective, I'm not going to try to filter this data out. If Andy decides to do that later, we'll let him do that. I'm going to go ahead and give him access to the entire data set, though. And it's as simple as that in terms of putting this together. So we'll give this thing a name here, and we'll go ahead and execute this process, which will go ahead and create a data set for us from a masking perspective. So you can see in the middle of the screen here that this process is running, and essentially what's happening is Unifi is taking the data set that I asked it to, and it's executing across those various functions from a masking perspective, so that very quickly what I can do is provide Andy access to an appropriate level of secured data set. And if I drill into that, you can see it took about 20 seconds. That process is successful. From an output perspective, I can see very quickly that this is exactly what I needed. I've got everything secured now, but at the same time, I've got the lead sources and the account balances wide open. So at this point, Andy has got exactly what he's going to need. So the one thing that I need to do as an administrator, though, is actually provide access to Andy and the other business analysts to this data. So we've run the process to go ahead and mask it and really get this data set compliant with GDPR requirements. And second step, again, is that what we're going to do is manage the appropriate level of access. So I've got a group of users called Contoso Business Analysts. And from a permissions perspective, I'm going to go ahead and open up not only this masked international customers, but also the sales data as well. That's exactly what Andy had asked for. So I'm going to now switch hats again. We'll skip the email part at this stage and assume that Andy has now been notified that he has access to this new data set. So again, switching hats, I'm putting on that analyst hat. I'm logging back in as Andy. In fact, I'm already logged in, but I'm going to go ahead and do that same search. And again, very quickly, I can see I've got two data sets. Interesting, I did ask for international sales, but I do see that I've got this masked customers as well. Kind of interested in what that is. That looks like something that Stu has decided to provide me access to. Lots of masked data, I can see that. And interesting, I do have some loyalty information, lead source, and account balance. So I do want to actually use this data set with the sales data set that I requested. Now, one of the things that Unifi is going to allow me to do now as an analyst is actually follow a very simple 6-step process to combine those data sets. So the first step of the process is creating the first data set, which I've done as international customers. And Unifi has automatically detected that there's a relationship through its AI and ML and some of the routines that are running under the covers. And so as an analyst, I don't have to really know SQL. I don't have to know coding or scripting. It's simply a one-click for me to be able to join those two data sources. I'm going to walk through this little process. When I go to the third step in the process, enrich data, Again, Unifi has detected that this data set has some sales and cost information on a line item basis, and it's recommending or suggesting that maybe you might want to actually calculate a gross margin on that information. So again, single click, no coding, no scripting. I don't even have to go into an expression builder. I can just leverage that recommendation from a one-click function perspective that Unifi has provided me. Again, just a huge benefit that we've gotten or typically get out of the Unifi system. In this case, I'm not going to add any filters. I want to go ahead and run everything. I'll probably pull this data set in at the detail level, and I'll do some aggregation within the BI tool. In this case, I'll go ahead and select all of my columns. And very quickly, I can go ahead and execute that process. So fast forward now back to my dashboard. What I can see now is very quickly what that has allowed me to do now is pull together the first steps at an international or global dashboard. Again, very quickly, we can see the top 5 countries here. We're not just looking at the United States. We are looking at a global perspective. We can also see that with the various bubbles representing all of the areas where we have activity around the world. I've got a nice trend line that still includes my catalog, online, reseller, and store business over the time period. And one thing I'd point out is we can see that all of that mask information flows right back through. So not something we would typically expose to our executives, but it is interesting to see that everything starts out from a GDPR wide open perspective. And by the time we get to an analyst view, we do have access to all of the business information that allows me to do things like lead source and loyalty tier from a tree map perspective, as well as a table perspective, while still maintaining that masking and all of that compliance around the data sets. Now, again, as you would expect, very interactive, everything works very nicely. I can go into full screen mode here and get just a really nice view of the global business. And what this does for me as a business analyst is very quickly gave me access to request some data sets that I did not have access to, get those data sets assigned to me from Stu, who happens to be our data steward, in a very compliant manner. And I've got a high degree of confidence now that I can continue. This is step 1, but I can really now start to create any of those global analytics that I need to create for my business. If I have additional questions, I've got a lot of confidence now that I can go back to Unifi. I can start to incorporate additional levels of detail, additional data sources, and very quickly start to bring these analytics to life and really answer some of these global business questions that I've been asked. So that concludes our demonstration today. I want to thank you all for your time, and we look forward to having a conversation with you further.